What's going on, guys? It's Cutie Paintball, and today we're finally going to be talking about the Bob Long phase with Reflex Engine. So if you guys aren't familiar with it, the Bob Long phase is a older marker that came out in 2013, I want to say. It's definitely a not so common marker in comparison to the competition, where you have the RSX, GTEX, older DMs, GOs, Axes. So there's a lot of competition that's far more well known in comparison to the Bob Long phase. Along with other Bob Longs, it competes or is an equal with the Onslaught, the Insight, and the Victus, which all use the same engine or variations of the engine, which is a spool valve marker. So a little bit of background on the marker. The Insight was released in 2013. It was Bob's first real take at a spool valve engine. MSRP was around $1,100, and the gun was beautifully milled, sort of reminiscent of the Ripper bodies, which many people have probably seen recently with the relaunch, I guess, limited production run of the VCOM Rippers. The marker and their interface was very typical Bob Long, OLED in the back, spring stack in the regulator tube. Ergonomics were solid marker. Unfortunately, the O-rings out of factory weren't the most reliable. There were tolerances issues, so reliability was not the best. Later on in the production, Bob Long figured out what the issue was, and there were fixes, and the engine ends up performing pretty well. But unfortunately, the platform did get a bit of a bad rep in general because of that. Obviously, first production run of spools, and you have leaking problems. Not the most confidence inspiring or the most successful launch. In 2015, Bob Long released the Onslaught. It's another beautifully milled gun, just like a lot of Bob's markers. This milling kind of is reminiscent of the Reptiles, and the engine got a bit of a rehaul. The revised brass ram shaft added a spring to soften the recoil, and revised the shutoff with an extra O-ring to increase reliability. All this to create a softer, more reliable shot. Essentially the new Reflex Engine, which I'll get back to in a little bit. This year, Bob also released the phase, MSRP of around $800, so quite a bit of a savings in comparison when running the same engine. Kind of similar to how the GTEC and the GTEC 160, 170R are compared to each other. It's actually kind of the introduction of trim levels for a paintball marker. The Bob Long phase has much more simplified milling to reduce costs. Very clean lines, not a lot of three-dimensional sculpting to the body itself. But along with the other spools, compared to the other spools, it still had the same great shot. It just may not have come with a cam lever or aluminum eye covers and such like that. So what are my thoughts on this marker now that I've owned it for about 6 months now? The shot is fantastic, I think. It kind of reminds me of a Poppet to some degree, despite it being a spool. It's a very fast and quick shot. It helps that the speed of the bolt is increased compared to other spools to fight against bolt stick and just breaking stiction of the O-rings for the next shot. So ergonomics, the marker is very comfortable in the hands. Everything is spaced out really nicely. You get a nice firm purchase on the grips. They don't wrap all the way around, they only wrap around the front, but the grips themselves are of decent texture. The regulator stock is just metal, which is kind of annoying. So I quickly, first thing I did was ordered a regulator cover for the marker, as I'm not too big of a fan on grabbing onto the bare metal regulators, as I believe we're kind of all spoiled now with all the rubber wrapped markers that we have these days. Like the 6, for example, everything is wrapped in rubber and it's extremely comfortable. But yeah, it doesn't change the fact that the spacing is very nice on the phase as well. The stock trigger. The trigger comes stock as a deuce, which in my opinion is a major win, as it's one of my very favorite types of triggers. The downside is that there's only 2 points of adjustment. You have post travel, and then you have micro switch activation, and that's it. There's no tension adjustment. You have a trigger spring in the back, which you need to keep in the marker. Do not take it out. You will have runaway with the trigger. You'll just keep shooting people, or you'll shoot yourself, or you'll shoot a teammate. You're not going to want to be shooting, but the gun's going to just want to shoot on its own. Do not take out the trigger unless you somehow modify it with a magnet or something like that. But I think you need actually a pretty strong magnet. The marker does have debound settings and delays that you can program to help fight this, but I would just recommend leaving it stock as it is and not touch it. Also, do not remove the spring. Did I mention that? Don't remove it. You'll have a very bad time putting it back in. Maintenance and assembly, or disassembly. The marker is definitely shows its age at this point in this category, because you have no toolless eyes, no toolless grips, no toolless battery access. You do have toolless bolt removal, but that's about it. It's old school. There's no pin connections connecting the eyes to the board. You got to be careful with the board, or removing wires from the board, not to pinch. Even from the factory, I noticed my eyes had a bit of a crimp connecting the trigger frame to the body. It happens. It's not a big deal. Everything functions fine on them. But given that, the gun is sort of a pain to take apart because of that. Bolt assembly is relatively easy. The bolt slides back out of the body by pushing the button at the top, which allows you to pull the body or the bolt out. When I got it stock from the factory, I could not get the bolt out of the body though. It was extremely difficult. I don't know. I had to use all my strength to actually rip the bolt out, and I was at risk of injury because I was putting so much force on the back of the bolt, and my fingers were slipping and like smashing into things. It just wasn't a good situation. I even had to resort to putting a wood dowel through the barrel side of the marker to push the bolt out because it was so stuck. I had to contact Field 1. Yosh got back to me within 20 minutes, I think. And there's a screw on the back that you loosen for some reason, and somehow that reduces the tension in the bolt system. I don't know how it works, but it was a huge, huge help. I was a little upset, a little discouraged that I just bought this marker and I could barely access the bolt, which needs to be maintained relatively frequently. The regulator uses a stacked spring set compared to your more commonly used spring. So there's inherently more complication to it, as there's more parts to it. You have to make sure the order of the springs are correct when you stack them back into the regulator. And it also makes for the regulator to be very sensitive. So you make very small adjustments when you're regulating pressure. There's only a HPR, there's no LPR to worry about with this marker. So there's no pressure tester that I know of for this marker, like you normally have with literally every other Bob Long marker. So things are very simple and streamlined with the Bob Long phase and the Reflex Engine across all these platforms. The solenoid is a pre-manufactured solenoid, so it's relatively cheap. You can still find them for sale. The power connection to the solenoid is soldered to it, so just be mindful of it when you're pulling the solenoid out, that you don't ruin them. It has 4 or 3 very thin O-rings that connect it to the body. Those are somewhat serviceable. The O-rings are apparently very difficult to find, so if you have issues with it, you're probably better off contacting Field One or buying a new solenoid. The Reflex Engine, compared to the competition, is not like the competition in any way. As a spool, doesn't have a very super soft and airy shot. It has a very fast and rather mechanical shot to it, in my opinion. There's a little bit of kick to it, but the kick is straight back into your shoulder. It's very minimal. There's virtually no barrel rise on the marker. The shot is actually quite satisfying in my opinion. But if you're looking for something like a Lux or a older DM, you will not find it here. As I mentioned possibly before, the shot kind of reminded me of a poppet to some degree with how quickly the shot finishes its cycle. For general maintenance, the bolt disassembles into 4 main sections. You have the bolt, rammer, front can / guide, which houses your shutoff and your rear can. And then you have the cap. I recommend maintenance before every day of play or 2 cases. The bolt moves very fast, which displaces the lube pretty easily. You need to use Dow 55 for the shaft, and then a couple drops of Tri-Flow lube on the bolt. I don't have it on me right here to show you, but it's an oil with silicone also in it, which gives it a little bit of longevity. It's pretty common to expect a little bit of bolt wear or breech wear where the bolt actually cycles in the marker. So cons on the marker. The barrel is kind of crappy. It only came with one back, and the back is actually quite short. It came with a 685, I believe. Really wasn't able to use it much, as most of the paint that I ended up shooting is closer to 688. So it was pushing it far too much, at kind of risking barrel breaks using such a small bore. I know some people actually do have smaller paint near them, and that would be perfect for it, but not for where I am. The feed neck is kind of trash. From the factory, the lever was actually bent. It still functioned fine, but there's a little bit of a bend to it. So it never kind of sat even when you push the lever down to be flush with the feed neck body. And this may be something that's kind of little. When you fire the marker, you feel air being exhausted from the back of the bolt. All guns kind of do this to some degree. It's just a little bit more prevalent on this platform. But it doesn't change how efficient that this marker is. It's crazy how many shots you can get out of it. You can pretty much expect 13 to 14 pods with a 77 or maybe even a 68, depending on the weather. So, in conclusion, as a whole, I believe Bob Long and Field One has kind of been a company that's a bit slept on at the moment, which is understandable as they haven't released anything new for quite some time now, aside from limited pre-production or limited production runs with fancy anno and milling, like the Rippers, the G6Rs. I believe the VCOM is being sold by, the new Ripper VCOM is also being sold by Field One. Not to be confused with the T-Rex, which is actually being handled by HK. But yeah, it's not the most prevalent platform, but it's definitely a solid platform that I think is worth possibly looking into. The market has kind of wildly changed recently over the past couple years, as they were in a bit of a lull, and now they seem to be rising in popularity at this point, and also value. many of their markers now inhabit the same space as the competition, or the competition's older markers, or mid-tier markers, like I mentioned before, GTEX, GOs, DMs, LV platform, Axes, older Luxes. So it's definitely stiff competition, and it's definitely the most, not the most mainstream marker that you could choose. But if you're looking for something a little bit different, I definitely think it's worth considering checking out this platform. Kind of the similar with newer players. I don't recommend a newer player grabbing a bob long phase or most bob longs. Kind of similar with autocockers. I more wholeheartedly recommend something like a G-Tech or an Axe, just something that's a little bit more bulletproof. You don't want to be overwhelmed with maintenance, dealing with markers you're unfamiliar with, and then you end up breaking them and stuff like that. Like, you need low pressure for the bob long phase, and you need to perform maintenance every time you go out to play with it. So it still makes it a competitive marker, but it just kind of limits its reach a little bit. So again, I highly recommend this platform. There's a lot of value for a competitive and competent marker for just $250 to $400. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, you know where to contact me. Comment down below. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace.